Well, welcome back to Camera Basics 102, and we're at part B. And we just started talking about light, and I want to continue with the whole subject of light. Talk about light coming in straight lines. And let's just step back a step here and open this up. Again, we talked a little bit light, and then we're really talking about visible light. Um, and we'll get more into this rule of the angle of incidence, the angle of reflection a little later on. But when we're taking photographs, typically there are three sources of light. There's the key light or the main light. That's the most it's the brightest light that lights up the object. Then we have a fill light and a background light. So if you can understand the background light, well, the light that then does the remainder is the fill light. If the key light is too bright, we get harsh shadows and blown out highlights. That is why, you don't want to photograph somebody on a sunny day around noontime. You want to do it earlier in the day or late in the afternoon because you want to avoid when the sun is bright and shiny because it is a very powerful light. And the same thing that we also want to avoid when we're doing flash work, a direct flash on somebody, because we want the scene to look natural, and we don't want harsh shadows, and we don't want blown out highlights. So we want to kind of soften the light. If you ever notice that on a bright sunny day, you'll always see your shadow, but on a day where it's cloudy and overcast, there are little or no shadows. Why? Because, well, we've diffused the light. The sun has to go through the clouds, and that diffuses the light. So you can imagine the sun is going, or the light's going in a straight line. It hits the material of the clouds, the drops of water and moisture, and it is diffused. So the light now goes in all kinds of directions. And that's what we want to do with the flashlight or any source of light that we're using typically. We want to somehow kind of diffuse it. And we'll use soft boxes or umbrellas, and we hit the light on an umbrella. Again, it's causing the light to scatter in many ways, and so it's less harsh. You'll also notice that the flash that we put on camera flash, we use a device so that only 20% of it goes towards the subject, 80% of it is lost. We're trying various techniques to diffuse the light. We can also add reflectors in to bring back some of that light, or we can add a scrim, and a scrim is a device that it's like a diffuser that we can put over somebody, for example, outside in the sun, that we can again help to diffuse the sunlight hitting somebody. So there are various tools that we can do again to soften that light down and make things look more pleasing. Let's talk a little about exposure. It's critical that you expose correctly. In the old days, we used to use a lot of light meters. Typically, a lot of those have disappeared these days. If you have a light meter, there's two types. There's ones that look at reflected light, and there's others that measure incident light. A lot of people use the camera, and the camera is because of the fact that you can actually see the picture. You can actually nowadays often use the camera to get a good sense of exposure. And a lot of time that's what we'll do. We like to arrive early at a place and take a lot of pictures and really get a sense of the exposure. And I really believe it's important that you get that exposure as close as possible to what it needs to be. If you underexpose and you try to correct that in Photoshop, and yes, you can go and you can increase exposure. The problem is a lot of those areas that were underexposed and dark, you end up a lot of issues, and it just does not produce a very good and pleasing picture. If you overexpose, you lose a lot of detail, and again looks washed out, and there's no way to recover it. So you have a very narrow range of exposure that you really need to fall within and allow for correction. As I said, getting that correct exposure is important. So I encourage people to take test photos and travel in a team. One of the things that does help us is that I can take one of the team members and ask them to stand and take a photograph with them in. So again, we're getting a better measure of exposure. Now, certain things that you need to be aware of regarding exposure is if you're using a filter, particularly if it's like a polarizer or neutral density filter. Anytime you're adding more glass to the lens, realize less light is getting through. That's why when you think of big zoom lenses, the more glass in there, every surface reduces the amount of light getting through. So you're going to have to increase exposure. So if you add a filter, you're going to have to increase exposure. Most cameras will allow either a third stop or a half stop adjustments either way, and you can do that for the flash and you can do that for exposure. Again, realize when you're adding this extra stop, you're adding extra time to the exposure time. Same if you take away, you're going to reduce the exposure time. Regarding filters, the most common filter is the UV haze filter, which is a good filter to protect the lens. If anything's get damaged, it should get damaged, not your lens. And it will reduce a lot of the harmful UV light. And it actually gives a more vibrant picture, I've discovered, by using it. So it's definitely a good thing to use. Be aware you can lose a little bit of sharpness, so you may want to open up the lens a little bit more. At nighttime, I would suggest removing it because it just can cause some problems. So I encourage the UV light to remove it at nighttime, but have it on during the day, and just open up the f-stop a little bit just to allow a little more sharpness to your pictures. Polarizers, basically they polarize light, or they cause part of the light to be bent at a right angle, so you lose some of the light. It's reflected off at 90 degrees, and with a circular polarizer, as you turn it, that amount of light that, or the wavelengths of light that are reflected off at 90 degrees changes, and so you can play around with it and try and get the sweet spot and remove glare or reflections. It will give a more vibrant blue sky, and instead it's going to remove various glares and reflections. So on a very sunny day, it can be a great thing to use. Neutral density filters, they reduce the amount of light getting in. So if you can imagine on a very sunny day having one on, videography typically uses neutral density filters to reduce the sun on a very sunny day. They can also be used if you want to get a little bit of a blur to your picture. For example, if we're downtown Chicago, as I explained before, and you have a picture during the day, you want to get the buildings, and you want to take a slower picture, and you want the people to appear blurred, then you could use one. If you're taking a picture of a waterfall and you want that water to become smoother as it falls, you could put it so, again, it just increases the exposure time and can smooth things out and blur certain things out that you want blurred. Back in the old days when we did black and white, there were other filters. We would add color filters, and they would bring out various things in black and white. What's nice today is a lot of those effects can be duplicated in Photoshop. One of the things I do not like to do is just take a picture and convert it to grayscale and say there's a black and white. There are so many things in Photoshop that you can do to really duplicate true black and white effects and get a much better black and white. Another thing to be aware of, I know a lot of people really feel that photoshopping a picture is anti-old school. Back in the days of film, there were different film types people use to get, for example, more vibrant picture, to get greater saturation, etc. And in fact, a lot of those effects are available in the camera. There are profiles in the camera, such as Standard Faithful, that allow you to duplicate some of those old film effects. You can also, again, duplicate a lot of them directly in Photoshop. A thing I want to talk about is megapixel. I mean, it seems, I think finally the megapixel war is over. You know, more and more cameras are continuously going up in megapixel. But the reality is, for most people with a point and shoot, megapixel really didn't matter, because if you're just doing 4x6s or something small, you don't need a major megapixel, and all you're doing is blowing a lot of memory for no valid reason. However, to us, megapixel is definitely important, and we typically shoot between 17 and 22 megapixel. The bigger the megapixel, the better. It allows us to create bigger pictures for our clients. In situations of low light where we may have to crop, we can crop just a little and still produce a very large picture for our customers. So we like megapixels. But I should say not all megapixels are the same. There is a resolution, there's a quality to that megapixel. So we're choosing cameras that produce high megapixel at a high quality. Second thing that I'll warn about megapixels when you get this large is they do require a lot of processing power with a computer. Hence we do have more powerful computers. I just made a point here that, again, in terms of megapixel, you may get a lower cost camera with a high megapixel, but not all megapixels are the same. There are different sizes of pixels and different sensitivities and resolution of pixels, and so we are picking cameras that produce the highest quality pixel resolution in photograph. Our cameras follow Getty guidelines. Getty, obviously being a contributor to Getty, they have very strict guidelines in terms of what camera can be used and how a photograph is treated, and we seek to follow those rules and stay with those cameras. I'm going to stop here and come back because this is a subject that we could talk a lot about, and we'll continue on this subject in part 3.